Kids don't whisper warnings unless they're afraid someone might hear. That's what stayed with me, not the words themselves, the whisper. It was a Thursday afternoon. I'd picked up my grandson Ethan from elementary school like I did every week. His backpack hit the back seat and he climbed in beside it, unusually quiet. Normally he talked nonstop, Minecraft, dinosaurs, whatever 7-year-old boys obsess over these days. But that afternoon, nothing, just silence and the faint squeak of his sneakers against the leather. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror as I pulled away from the curb. "You okay, buddy?" He nodded quickly, too quickly. Then he leaned forward, close enough that I could see the tiny freckles across his nose. "Grandma," he whispered, "don't tell Dad I told you." That sentence alone made my stomach tighten. Because children don't negotiate secrecy unless they've been taught to fear consequences. "I won't," I said gently. "What is it?" He hesitated, looked out the window, then back at me. "He goes in your room." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "My room?" "At your house," he said, "when you're not there." A strange chill moved through my chest. "You mean when he drops you off?" He nodded. "He tells me to stay downstairs." Kids notice everything, even the things adults think they hide well. My son Daniel had moved back to our town 6 months ago after his divorce. He was struggling, emotionally, financially, professionally. I let him use my house whenever he needed to pick Ethan up or drop him off while I was at work. He had a key. Because he was my son. Because I trusted him. Because trust is supposed to be automatic between parents and children, right? "What does he do in my room?" I asked carefully. Ethan shrugged. "I don't know." Pause. Then quieter. "But he gets mad if I go upstairs." Mad. Not annoyed, not distracted. Mad. That distinction mattered more than anything. That night I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Daniel had grown up in that house. His childhood bedroom was still upstairs. Maybe he just went in there to remember simpler times. Maybe he needed quiet. Maybe he needed space. Maybe. But something about Ethan's whisper kept replaying in my head. Not the words, the fear behind them. 3 days later, Daniel stopped by while I was at work. I knew because my security system logged the door opening at 2:14 p.m. I normally didn't check those notifications, but now I did. At 2:16 p.m., motion triggered upstairs. At 2:21 p.m., motion again. My bedroom, not his old room, mine. He left at 2:32 p.m., 18 minutes, not long enough to nap, long enough to search, or hide something, or take something. That night I stood in my bedroom doorway and just looked around. Everything seemed normal. Bed made, jewelry box untouched, closet closed, nothing missing. At least nothing obvious, which somehow made it worse, because if nothing was missing, then why was he coming in here at all? I called him casually the next morning. "You stopped by yesterday?" I asked. "Yeah," he said easily, "just grabbing some old paperwork." Paperwork. Neutral word. Safe word. "What paperwork?" Pause. Then, tax stuff. Tax stuff. Daniel hadn't filed his taxes on time in years, and none of his paperwork had ever been in my bedroom. After we hung up, I opened my closet slowly. There, in the back corner, was the small, fireproof lockbox I'd kept for years. Inside were documents most people never think about until it's too late. Insurance policies, property deeds, bank access instructions, and one thing Daniel didn't know existed. At least, I thought he didn't. Because when I opened it, everything looked normal. Except for one detail. The envelope labeled Secondary Account Authorization was no longer sealed. Someone had opened it, carefully, precisely. And suddenly, my grandson's whisper didn't sound like imagination anymore. It sounded like warning. And I realized something that made my chest go cold. Daniel hadn't been visiting my house to remember his past. He'd been preparing for my future. I didn't confront Daniel right away. That's the mistake people make when they suspect someone they love. They rush in with accusations, hoping the truth will fix itself. But truth doesn't fix itself. Truth hides. It adapts. It watches you while pretending everything is normal. So I said nothing. Instead, I resealed the envelope carefully, pressing the flap down exactly the way it had been before, and slid the lockbox back into the corner of my closet. Then I waited, because waiting reveals patterns, and patterns reveal intention. 2 days later, my phone buzzed while I was at work. Front door opened, 1:47 p.m. Daniel, again. I didn't move, didn't call, didn't react. Just watched the security app as motion sensors triggered one by one. Entryway, stairs, hallway, bedroom. He stayed longer this time, 26 minutes. Then he left. No hesitation, no pause, like he knew exactly what he was doing. That night, I opened the lockbox again. This time, I noticed something I'd missed before. The documents weren't just opened. They'd been repositioned. Subtle, barely noticeable. But I've organized paperwork the same way for 15 years. I knew exactly how it should look. And now it didn't. Which meant he hadn't just looked. He'd handled them, studied them, memorized them. The next morning I drove to the bank. Not the branch Daniel used, a different one. Downtown, older building, quieter, safer. I asked to speak with a manager. A woman named Cynthia invited me into her office and closed the door. "What can I help you with today?" she asked politely. I took a breath. "I'd like to review all activity connected to my secondary account authorization." She typed for a moment, then stopped. Her expression shifted, subtle, professional, concerned. "Mrs. Harper," she said carefully, "we received an inquiry about that account last week." My stomach tightened. "Inquiry?" "Yes." "From who?" She hesitated. "Your son." The word son sounded different in that moment. Heavier, colder. Not family, not comfort, just fact. "What exactly did he ask?" I said. "He requested information about authorization procedures in the event of incapacitation." Incapacitation. My mouth went dry. That wasn't casual curiosity. That was preparation. He said he wanted to understand the process in case something happened to you. Something happened. The words echoed in my head. Because suddenly this wasn't about paperwork. It was about timing, about control, about what happens when someone decides your life has an expiration date. I left the bank feeling like gravity had shifted. Every memory of Daniel over the past 6 months replayed differently now. The sudden interest in my finances, the casual questions. Mom, do you still handle everything yourself? You ever think about simplifying your accounts? You should make sure everything's organized, just in case. Just in case. I thought he meant peace of mind. Now I realized he meant access. That afternoon, Ethan sat at my kitchen table coloring dinosaurs while I made grilled cheese. He hummed quietly to himself. Safe, unaware, still trusting the world. Ethan, I said gently, setting his plate down. He looked up. When your dad goes upstairs, does he ever carry anything? He thought about it, then nodded slowly. Papers. My heart sank. What kind of papers? I don't know. Pause. Then, he puts them in his backpack. Backpack. Portable. Easy. Invisible. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded louder. Every shadow felt heavier. Because once suspicion enters your home, nothing feels neutral anymore. At 2:13 a.m., I got out of bed, walked quietly to the hallway, and opened the small cabinet near the stairs. Inside was something Daniel didn't know existed. A secondary camera, hidden, installed years ago after a break-in across the street. I hadn't used it in ages, but it was still functional, still watching, still recording. I connected it to my phone, scrolled back, and there he was, Daniel, standing outside my bedroom door, looking over his shoulder before stepping inside. His movements calm, familiar, confident, like he believed he belonged there. Then, 5 minutes later, he walked out holding something thin, rectangular, an envelope. My envelope. My hands trembled as I watched the screen, because this wasn't fear anymore. This was confirmation. He wasn't guessing. He knew exactly where to look, which meant one thing. He'd been planning this long before Ethan ever whispered that warning. And suddenly, the question wasn't why he was preparing. It was how far he was willing to go. I didn't call the police, not yet. Because once you accuse your own child of something this serious, there's no undo button, no reset, no going back to Sunday dinners and casual phone calls. There's only before and after. And I wasn't ready for after. Not until I understood everything. 3 days later, Daniel called. His voice sounded unusually calm. "Hey, Mom," he said. "You home today?" "No," I lied. "Work until 5. Pause. "Mind if I stop by and grab a few old photos?" Photos. Another harmless word, another harmless excuse. "Of course," I said. Then I hung up and stayed very still, because he'd just handed me exactly what I needed. Timing. I drove home and parked 2 houses down. Killed the engine, waited. At 1:58 p.m., his car turned onto the street. He parked in my driveway like he always had, like he owned the right to be there, like nothing had changed. He went inside without hesitation, didn't look around, didn't suspect anything. Because why would he? To him, I was still predictable, still trusting, still blind. I slipped inside through the back door 10 minutes later. Quiet, careful. The house was silent, except for faint movement upstairs. My heart pounded harder with every step, not from fear, from clarity, because once you see the truth forming, you can't unsee it. I climbed halfway up the stairs and stopped. Daniel was inside my bedroom, his back to the door, standing at my closet, holding the lockbox, open. For a second, I couldn't breathe, because watching someone you love steal from you doesn't feel like anger. It feels like loss. Daniel. He froze, slowly turned around, his face drained of color. Mom. Not surprise, recognition. He knew exactly why I was there. Neither of us spoke for a moment, the air between us thick with everything neither of us wanted to say out loud. Finally, he set the lockbox down carefully, like gentleness could undo what he'd already done. I was going to tell you, he said. No, he wasn't. People who plan don't confess voluntarily. They confess when they're caught. What are you doing? I asked quietly. He looked at the floor, then at me, his eyes tired, older, desperate. I need access, he said. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I made a mistake. I need. For what? I asked. He hesitated, then exhaled slowly. I'm in trouble. That word again, trouble. Adult trouble doesn't mean detention or embarrassment. It means debt. It means liability. It means consequences measured in numbers too large to ignore. How much? I asked. He swallowed. A lot. Not an answer. A shield. He sat on the edge of my bed, looked smaller than I remembered. When Claire and I split up, he said, things fell apart. Split up? That was news to me. They'd told Ethan it was temporary. The dad was just staying somewhere else for a while. But temporary is often just a softer word for permanent. I made some investments, he continued. Investments. Another word people use when they don't want to say losses. They didn't work out. Of course they didn't. They never do when desperation is involved. How much do you owe? I pressed. He hesitated again, then said it. 400,000. The number hit harder than I expected. Because it wasn't just money. It was motive. It was explanation. It was justification. They're going to take everything, he said quietly. My accounts, my car, maybe even custody. Custody. That word shifted something inside me. Because this wasn't just about greed. It was about fear. Fear of losing his son. Fear of losing his life. Fear of losing control. So you decided to take mine, I said. He flinched. I was going to pay it back. Temporary. Always temporary. How? I asked. Silence, because there was no plan, only hope. And hope isn't a financial strategy. I needed authorization, he said finally. That envelope gives me legal access. Yes, it did, under certain conditions. Conditions he clearly believed he could create. Conditions like illness, like incapacity, like death. That realization hit like ice water. You weren't just preparing to use it, I said slowly. You were preparing to activate it. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence confirmed everything. My grandson's whisper echoed in my mind. He goes in your room. Not curiosity, not nostalgia, preparation. Because Daniel wasn't just trying to solve a financial problem. He was positioning himself for a future where I wasn't able to stop him. And suddenly, I understood why he'd been asking about procedures, why he'd been studying documents, why he'd been waiting. He wasn't just planning for his survival, he was planning for my absence. Daniel sat on the edge of my bed, shoulders slumped, the lockbox open beside him, like a confession neither of us wanted to say out loud. For a moment, He looked less like the man who had been secretly studying my financial access, and more like the boy who used to run through these same hallways with scraped knees and unfinished homework. "I wasn't going to hurt you," he said quietly. The fact that he said it without me asking made my chest tighten, because people only clarify that when they know how it looks. "How long?" I asked. He hesitated. 3 months. 3 months of quiet preparation. 3 months of calculated access. 3 months of believing I wouldn't notice. Or worse, 3 months of believing I didn't matter. I stepped closer to the closet and looked down at the lockbox. "You took copies," I said. It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. "They said it would help speed up the process," he replied. They, not I. They. My stomach dropped. Who is they? He didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened. People I owe. Debt changes people. It changes their priorities, their morality, their definition of acceptable. That's when I noticed it, his backpack, sitting on the floor near the dresser, half unzipped. Same black backpack Ethan carried to school every day, except heavier, bulkier, not a child's bag, an adult's burden. "What's in there?" I asked. He froze, too still. "Nothing important." Nothing important is never nothing important. I stepped past him and picked it up. He stood quickly. "Mom!" But I'd already opened it. Inside were folders, documents, copies of my identification, my Social Security statement, bank authorization forms, insurance beneficiary paperwork. Everything needed to assume control of my financial life. Everything needed to move quickly if something happened to me, or if someone claimed something had. But that wasn't what made my hands go cold. It was the small orange prescription bottle tucked in the side pocket, my name printed on the label. Except I didn't recognize the medication. "What is this?" I asked. His face went pale. "It's nothing." I read the label. A sedative. Strong. Not something I'd ever been prescribed. "Why do you have this?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer, because there was no innocent explanation. And suddenly, Ethan's whisper replayed in my mind, "Don't tell Dad I told you." Not curiosity, not imagination. Fear. Because children sense danger long before adults allow themselves to admit it. "I never gave this to you," I said. He ran a hand through his hair. "They told me it would help if you were calmer." Calmer. The word made my stomach turn. Because calm people don't question. Calm people don't resist. Calm people don't protect themselves. "You were going to drug me," I said. Not accusation, reality. His voice cracked. "I wasn't going to hurt you." He kept saying that, like repeating it could make it true. I just needed time. Time to move money. Time to activate authorization. Time to become the decision maker. Time to turn me into someone incapable of stopping him. I sat down slowly, not from weakness, from clarity. Because the most dangerous betrayal isn't theft, it's justification. He believed he wasn't hurting me. He believed survival made it acceptable. He believed desperation made it forgivable. "I'm your mother," I said quietly. His eyes filled with something fragile. I know. But knowing and understanding are different things, and desperation had pushed him somewhere understanding couldn't reach. That night after he left, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with Ethan's drawings still taped to the refrigerator. Stick figures holding hands. Family. Simple. Uncomplicated. Safe. The way children believe the world should be. The way adults quietly destroy it. The next morning, I called my attorney. Not the police. Not yet. But protections were put in place immediately. Financial authority restricted. Access revoked. Documents secured. Legal barriers Daniel couldn't cross. Not now. Not ever. Weeks passed. His creditors came. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just letters, calls, legal notices, consequences. Claire eventually took Ethan and moved across the state. Safer, quieter, away from the pressure Daniel had created. I still see my grandson every Sunday. He never mentions that day. Children rarely do. But sometimes when he hugs me goodbye, he holds on a little longer, like he understands something he shouldn't have needed to, like he knows his whisper mattered. Because it did. It saved me. Not just financially, but physically, emotionally, completely. Daniel calls occasionally, short conversations, careful, measured, broken in ways neither of us knows how to fix. Because trust, once fractured, never reforms the same way. It reshapes itself into distance, into caution, into memory. I still keep the lockbox, still keep the documents, still keep control, not out of fear, out of awareness. Because the hardest lesson I've ever learned wasn't about money. It wasn't about betrayal. It was about how quietly desperation can turn someone you love into someone you don't recognize, and how sometimes the only reason you survive it is because a 7-year-old child was brave enough to whisper the truth.